Welcome to Abergavenny Baptist Church. Life, faith, together.
Have you ever had that experience where one minute you are on the spiritual high, and then the next moment you're on this awful spiritual low? You know what I mean? So you go to a church service, a great church service, and they've got this amazing worship, and they've got this, the sermon is a powerful sermon, and you feel so close to God. You hear God speaking to you, and you're filled with excitement, you're filled with passion, only for the next day. You wake up and you feel nothing. And it feels as though God is distant. Have you ever had that experience? I can remember going on youth camps and house parties and going to Christian conferences, going for these week-long conferences and being surrounded by so many other people who are just so passionate for Jesus. And the worship is amazing. The talks are powerful. And we see so many people coming and giving their lives to Jesus. And so we feel so close to God. We feel so excited. We're on this incredible spiritual high for the whole week. And then we get back home. And we feel completely deflated and depressed. I don't even know if I exist, let alone if God exists. And there have been other times when I've had this amazing church service where we've really seen answers to prayer. And then after the service, someone will come up and say, or make some complaint about some trivial thing. And it'll be like a pinprick in a balloon. And you just feel deflated. And you feel like saying, Lord, I've had enough. You just feel like giving up. And there are times like that when I suddenly start thinking to myself, well, what's wrong with me? Am I a hypocrite? Or am I the odd one? Is everyone else on this permanent spiritual high? Well, if you felt like that, then I've got some good news. You're not alone. In fact, you're in some good company, because that's exactly how Elijah the prophet felt. Elijah is arguably the greatest prophet of the Old Testament. Miracles happen whenever he shows up. At Jesus' transfiguration, who's there? Moses and Elijah. He's a great prophet. And he's just had this incredible spiritual high. He has just defeated all the prophets of Baal. You remember the story in 1 Kings chapter 18. Israel has come to a low point in their history. King Ahab has married a woman called Queen Jezebel, who is a foreigner, and that means she doesn't worship the true God. She worships an idol called Baal or Baal. And she's not only turned King Ahab away from worshiping God, but she's turned the whole nation, all the Israelites away from worshiping the true God, and they are now worshiping the idol Baal instead. And then Elijah turns up. And he challenges all the prophets of Baal to a contest. The venue, Mount Carmel. In the red corner, we have the prophet Elijah. In the blue corner, we have 450 prophets of Baal. And he says in 1 Kings chapter 18 and verse 22, Elijah says, I am the only one of the Lord's prophets left, but Baal has 450 prophets. One against 450. And when Elijah makes this announcement, you get the feeling that he's thinking, and I like the odds. The contest involves both teams preparing a bull on an altar, and then calling out to their God, taking turns to call out to their God to send fire from heaven to burn up the sacrifice. The God who responds by sending fire from heaven, he is the real God. And so the prophets of Baal go first, and they start dancing and calling out to Baal, and they go on and on all morning, but nothing happens. And so Elijah starts to taunt them. And we read in verse 27, Elijah says, "Shout louder. Surely he is a god. Perhaps he's deep in thought. Perhaps he's daydreaming." Or busy. That's a very polite translation. A literal translation would be, perhaps he's on the toilet. I really don't like it when the Bible translators try to be more polite and holy than the Bible. Or traveling. Maybe he's sleeping and must be awoken. You can hear the cocky confidence from Elijah, can't you? I mean, he's the Muhammad Ali of Old Testament prophets. This just makes the prophets of Baal even more frantic, and they start shouting even louder. And they go on all afternoon, but still nothing. It's a complete failure. Eventually, the exhausted prophets of Baal call it a day. Now it's Elijah's turn. He prepares the bull on the altar, and then he orders the people to drench the bull in water, not once, but 3 times. Now, this is not a great way to make a barbecue, okay? And then we read in verses 37 to 39, Elijah says, "Answer me, Lord, answer me, so these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again." Then the fire of the Lord fell and burnt up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, the soil, and also licked up the water in the trench. When the people saw this, they fell prostrate and cried, "The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God." I mean, friends, it simply doesn't get any better than this. I mean, he must have been on one spiritual high. He has just triumphed. Everyone, the whole nation has turned back to worshiping God. The 450 prophets of Baal have been killed, and he must have been on one incredible spiritual high. It simply doesn't get any better. And then the very next chapter we read, in 1 Kings chapter 19 and verses 3 and 4, Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. And when he came to Beersheba in Judah, he came to a broom bush, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. "I've had enough, Lord," he said. He's afraid and he runs for his life. What's he afraid of? One woman, Queen Jezebel. When she finds out that Elijah that all the prophets of Baal have been killed because of Elijah, she sends Elijah a message. And we read in verse 2, she says, "May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like one of them." Now, that's an empty threat. I mean, if she really meant it, if it wasn't an empty threat, she wouldn't be sending a message. She would be sending an assassin. But she's powerless. All the prophets have been defeated, and the power of Baal has been defeated. It's an empty threat. So how is it that Elijah can go from this spiritual high on the top of Mount Carmel down to this spiritual low down in the valley, sitting in the wilderness, in the desert, wishing he was dead? doesn't make sense, does it? We don't understand until we remember how we felt after that Christian conference or that youth camp or whatever else, and how we went from this incredible spiritual high to feeling completely deflated and as if God is distant. And today we're going to be looking at how God restores Elijah. And God restores him physically, spiritually, emotionally, vocationally, and socially. So firstly, God restores Elijah physically. We read in verse 5 to 8. Then he lay down under the bush and fell asleep. All at once an angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat." He looked around, and there by his head was some bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank and then lay down again. The angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, "Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you." So he got up and ate and drank. Strengthened by the food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. Take note that the first thing the angel says to Elijah is not, "Get up and read your Bible more, pray more, fast more, worship more." He doesn't say that. The first thing Elijah needed was some good sleep, good food, and some exercise. So often when we feel deflated and it feels as though God is distant, what we need is some good sleep and some good food and some exercise. Because the problem so often is that we are simply exhausted. We're running on empty. We're tired. Now, it doesn't mean we're all going to be able to order heavenly takeaways and have an angel deliver it to us. But it does mean we can have a healthy meal and get an early night. And we don't have to go for a 40-day walk. Just go for a walk. Get some exercise. You see, it's a lot harder to pray when you're exhausted. And we're all human. We all need rest. We all need Sabbath. And I find once I've rested, I'm able to see things in proper perspective. And I'm able to read more. And I'm able to enjoy praying more. And I start to feel close to God again. Sometimes we try to be too spiritual. Sometimes we try to be more spiritual than Elijah. If Elijah needs sleep and food and rest, so do we. First part of being restored is we need to be restored physically. Secondly, God restores Elijah spiritually. So after being strengthened by the food and the rest, he's able to travel for 40 days to Mount Horeb, also known as Mount Sinai. Now, if Mount Carmel is the mountain of victory, Mount Horeb is the mountain of encounter. This is the place of the burning bush where God reveals himself to Moses. And the place where God gives Moses the 10 Commandments. And God says in verse 11, "Go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Then a great powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. After the fire came a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, He pulled his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. When Elijah heard that gentle whisper, he recognized the voice of God. And so he goes out of his cave and he stands in the presence of God. But why all the special effects? I mean, if God's going to reveal himself and speak through a gentle whisper, why the special effects? Why the wind and the fire and the earthquake? I think God was trying to teach Elijah a very important lesson. That God is not always found in the spectacular and the supernatural, but sometimes in that gentle whisper. You see, so often we think God is only found in the supernatural and the spectacular. I mean, when Moses went up the mountain, there was wind and fire and the earth shook. And so it's easy to assume that God only speaks and reveals himself through the spectacular. And so often when we feel that God's distant and we feel deflated, we start chasing after the spectacular. We think God's going to meet us there. Often the reason why we don't hear God speaking to us is not because God is not speaking, but because we're not listening. Or more accurately, we're not listening to the right things, or we're looking in the wrong place. You know, if I was in that cave, I would have come out of the cave as soon as the wind and the fire came. Because when we're going through that bad patch, or even when we're not, we chase after the supernatural and the spectacular. When God wants to speak to us through that gentle whisper. The New Revised Standard Version translation of the phrase gentle whisper is the sound of sheer silence. The way we are spiritually restored is by quietening our spirit and encountering God in the silence. As Psalm 46 and verse 10 says, "Be still and know that I am God." Is there enough silence in your day to hear God? I don't know what your day is like, but mine is just constant noise. Back-to-back meetings, friends and family fill, days off, every spare moment. I'm checking my phone. I'm checking my phone first thing in the morning and last thing before night. Constant noise. What's the solution? In and amongst all the hecticness of life, we need to find time where we can unplug, quieten our spirits, and be still, and simply know God. That's how we can be spiritually restored. And then thirdly, God restores Elijah emotionally. But take note, he first restores him physically and spiritually, then emotionally. At the end of verse 13, we read, "Then a voice said to him, 'What are you doing here, Elijah?'" Now we need to assume that God knows exactly what Elijah is doing there. So why does he ask the question? He's giving Elijah an opportunity to voice his own feelings. He's given Elijah an opportunity to come to terms with how he's really feeling, but more than that, to come to terms with the reality of the situation. Now, Elijah's answer is very revealing. He doesn't say what we would expect. He doesn't say, "Well, I've just had this amazing victory over all the prophets of Baal. You should have seen their faces when the fire came. Nice touch, licking up all the water from the trench. And you'll be pleased to know, God, that now everyone has turned back to you and are worshiping you. But then I got scared of this one woman, Jezebel, and so I ran away, and that's why I'm here. Well, actually, now that I say that out loud, it kind of sounds silly to be scared of just one person. But he doesn't say that. This is what he says. Verse 14. I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, tore down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me too. Do you notice what's missing? It's like the whole Carmel event didn't take place. It's as if he's convinced himself that it never happened. And the phrase, I'm the only one left, he repeats it. He repeats what he said at Mount Carmel, but at Mount Carmel, he said it with triumph. Now he says it with despair. It's interesting how God responds. He doesn't respond with a pep talk, with a lecture, correcting his self-pity. In fact, he first restores him physically. He then restores him spiritually. And then he just lets Elijah voice his feelings and his fears. And then later, almost as a gentle afterthought, he says in verse 18, God says, yet I reserve 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed down to Baal and whose mouths have not kissed him. A paraphrase would be, oh, Elijah, by the way, you have repeatedly mentioned that you're the only one left. Well, that's not quite true. You are not alone. In fact, you have never been alone. There have always been another 7,000 who have not worshipped Baal. Just so you know. Once we've been physically restored, spiritually restored, we're at the place where we can stop being so self-absorbed, start seeing things in proper perspective, and can hear the truth and be emotionally restored. Fourthly and fifthly, God restores Elijah vocationally and socially. We read in verses 15 and 16. The Lord said to him, go back the way you came. Go to the desert in Damascus. When you get there, anoint Hazael, king of Aram. Also anoint Jehu, king over Israel. And anoint Elisha to succeed you as prophet. Elijah's a prophet. And one of the things that prophets do is they anoint people to become king. And so after a time of being restored physically and spiritually, God says, get up and get back to work. And when we feel that we're just exhausted and we're tired and God feels distant, yes, it's right to stop, rest, be restored physically and spiritually, but then we need to get back up and get back to work, get back to what God has called us to do. But God doesn't just restore him vocationally, God also restores him socially. He's told to go and anoint Elisha to succeed him. From this point on, these two become inseparable. They become the best of friends. They become great friends, and they become a great support for each other all the way through for the rest of Elijah's life. You see, when we feel deflated, when we feel that God is distant, when we feel like giving up, when we feel like we've hit rock bottom emotionally, what we do is we cut ourselves off from other people. We cut ourselves off from the church. We cut ourselves off from the people who love us the most. And that's exactly what Elijah had done. We told in verse 3 that he ran for his life. He ran away from everyone. He even left his servant, his closest servant, behind. Cut himself off. And this just makes things worse. No wonder he was able to convince himself that Mount Carmel never happened. And be able to convince himself that he was the only one left. There was no one there to correct him. There was no one there to remind him what God had done in his life. We need each other. If Elijah's story teaches us the importance of being alone with God, it also teaches us the danger of being apart from people. It's very tempting to say, well, I just need God. God is all I need. There's only one problem with that. God disagrees. God says you need other people. God said to Elijah, you need other people. Even though Elijah wasn't able to see that for himself, so God graciously gives him Elisha. Because God knows we need each other. And that's why we need to gather on Sundays to worship together. That's why we need to be connected into a life group, because we need each other. So how are you doing? Does God feel distant at the moment? Do you feel tired, exhausted spiritually? Do you feel like you've hit rock bottom emotionally? Do you feel like saying, I've had enough, Lord? If that's how you feel, can I encourage you to get a good, healthy meal and an early night and get some rest? Because you're probably just tired. And then unplug. Find some time and space where you can unplug, quieten your spirit, and be still and simply know God. And allow God to restore you physically, spiritually, and emotionally. And then reconnect. Reconnect with people, with the work you were doing for God. Reconnect vocationally and socially. Reconnect with your church family so that you can be fully restored. We're going to respond this morning by singing the well-known hymn, Be Still for the Presence of God. And as we sing this, allow God to minister to you afresh. Allow God by His Spirit to bring healing and restoration and fresh grace.
Thank you for watching. For more information, please visit our website at abergavennybaptist.co.uk.